So please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Ralph Carson. There you go.
Thank you, Jim. One thing Jim forgot to tell you is I've just recently signed an exclusive contract with HBO, home box office. Thank you. Thank you very much. For only $49.95 a month, I can watch all the specials, sporting shows, in the comfort of my own living room. So, kind of proud of that. I'm from Alabama. Now, last night everybody's talking about going visiting in Utah, and they don't see me because I'm in Alabama. And some of you are giggling. Now, despite what you think, not everybody in Alabama lives in a trailer. There is a huge waiting list. I do a lot of traveling. In fact, last year I went to 9 countries and 36 different states. And I am married. I've been married 30 years. And you wonder, how does your wife stay with you with all this travel? And it's interesting. My wife refers to me as a model husband. Now, I know a lot of you women out there wish you had model husbands, but he refers to me as a model husband. I thought that was great until I looked it up in the dictionary, in which I found out that model means a small replica of the real thing. So I'm going to spend a few minutes today just kind of talking a little bit about the science of MonaVie. And unfortunately, when you start talking about health foods, nutrients, supplements, and so forth, there is very little information scientifically about this area. And what is known is controversial. And so I get questions all the time because I'm a scientist and I believe in what we call evidence-based or empirically based, that, what is the research? Well, you have to understand that in order to get something approved so you can make a claim for it, that you have to go through an entirely incredible process. Now, that process minimally takes 15 years before you can make a claim, and an average of $4.8 million. The first 6.5 years are animal and cell culture studies, and those studies last about 6.5 years. After that, it's proven to be effective and safe. Then it goes into what we call clinical or human studies. So the first 1.5 years usually takes about 100 volunteers or more that they test it for safety. Then they test it 2 years for efficacy. Does it work, and are there no side effects? Then another 3.5 years, which they call long-term studies. Does it work over the long term? And then another 1.5 years to be reviewed by the powers that be, the FDA. So 15 years later, minimally, then out of every 5,000 new products that come out, 5 make it to the clinical. And out of those 5, 1 makes it so it can make a claim. So you can see how difficult it is when you ask, how come we can't make claims, especially about natural foods? In fact, there's what they call the Nutritional Health and Labeling Act that limits the claims that can be made on any food or natural product. And do you know that right now there are only 9 products out there, 9 foods out there that you can make claims for? And they're limited in what you can make those claims for. Now, those 9 foods are soy, psyllium seed, oat bran, omega-3. And I want you to pay careful attention to the next 5. They are lycopene, xanthine, lutein, cranberries, sterols, and fruits and vegetables. Those are the 9. Now you may say, wait, I know there's a lot you can say about vitamins, aren't there? And a lot of claims can be made. Well, it turns out that the National Institute of Health and the Institute of Medicine only allows recommendations for 3 things concerning vitamins, and they're not in the average population. Those 3 things are they can make claims for calcium and vitamin D in women who are postmenopausal to help bone. Number 2, they can say about vitamin E, beta-carotene, zinc, and vitamin C can help non-smokers who have age-related macular degeneration. And the third thing they can say is that 400 micrograms of folic acid helps women of childbearing age to prevent neural tube defect. That's it. Those are the claims that can be made on any product. Now, here's the sad thing. If you were to read and keep up with the literature in terms of natural products in 2005 and 2006, there were no new discoveries or new claims, except certain things we believed about products were refuted. The first of these was vitamin E. Vitamin E was shown not to help people with heart disease or cancer. In fact, taken over a long period of time at high dosages could cause cardiac distress. It also showed that echinacea was not helpful for people who have colds, either to treat it or to prevent it. 2006, they just came out with a report which is a review of 150 scientific articles, and they claim that green tea has no value in terms of cancer or preventing heart disease. Antibacterial soap was found to be no more beneficial in cutting down germs than regular soap, and that over-the-counter cough drops, cough medications, cough lozenges are no value whatsoever. It takes 7 days of taking cough drops to get rid of the cold, or a week to get rid of it on its own. So, it's kind of a scary field out there to be a scientist and talking to you about a product like MonaVie. However, what I want to share with you, and what hopefully you got from the things that can be claimed, is that you can claim things for fruits as a group. There are over 300,000 articles, 300,000 peer-reviewed published articles on the values of increasing your consumption of fruit. If you were, and I think we have copies of those articles in the back, so if you'd like to read them on your way out, they're available to you. And if you were to read them, you would find that when they look at heart disease, 950,000 people had heart disease last year, it would help reduce the risk by 30%. 160,000 strokes, it would help to reduce the risk by 30%. 44 million people with high blood pressure, fruits would have helped reduce the risk by 30%. People who have COPD, which stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you might better know it as bronchitis or asthma, 15 million people, it would have helped by 30%. If you have cancer, and 1/4 of the people, 30% less risk if you consume fruits. If you take and have a blindness due to macular degeneration or cataracts, 30% help by consuming fruits. If you took and had arthritis, which 70 million people have, 30% would be helped by fruits. Now, this is fruits as a group, but it's kind of interesting that that is the way it is. Now, what kind of studies are not the studies that we really would necessarily claim proof? Because they're what we call prospective studies. That means we watch a group of people, a large number of people, they keep food records, and we see what diseases they get. That's called a prospective study. Or we do what's called a retrospective study, where we take people who have a certain disease, find out what they ate, and then see what disease was caused by what types of diets. Or we do another type of study called an epidemiological study, where we watch large populations of people and what they eat and the disease they develop. But we really don't see studies where we take a fruit and a person who has a disease, give them a placebo, watch them for 10 years and see what happens to them. So again, it's a very difficult area to deal with. Now, how does that happen? How do you get such incredible benefits that have been documented in terms of eating fruits? What's in the fruit that does that? And I always like to tell the story about a farming family in rural Alabama. And they were really behind the times. They had never been to the big city. And they ended up taking a vacation up to Nashville, and there was a man and his wife and his son. And they were going into the hotel, left the wife in the car, went to the hotel, went to the front desk, and said, "We'd like a room." And they got a room on the 9th floor. They didn't say, "We got to go there. How do we get there?" And the attendant pointed to the elevator. So they went over to the elevator, and there's an old lady there. She was kind of wrinkled like a prune, had gray hair, a dowager's hump. She pushes the button, and the door's open. She walks to the door closes, and then about 60 seconds later, the door opens, and a beautiful blonde comes walking out. And the husband says to the boy, "Quick, get your mom." So how do these fruits cause this amazing change? Well, there's two very important points to understand how this happens. If you study any type of disease, there's two phases. It's called the initiation, the original injury, and the progression, the continuation of the healing process. Now, the initiation in many diseases is caused by what we would term free radicals. Free radicals are basically unpaired electrons, or they're reactive oxygen species. And so 3 examples I want to give you is, one is there's a dysfunction of the endothelial cells. That's technical language for there's an injury to your vessel. When there's an injury to your vessel, then you develop plaque or occlusion, and then you develop a heart attack, and then you die. So it all started with that injury. And so what antioxidants do, they take the fun out of dysfunction. They basically pair up that electron so it can't cause that injury. Now in cancer, there is a situation where you get mutations. And to give you an example of what this is like, is let's say someone went into a furniture manufacturing plant and got the blueprints, and they rearranged the blueprints so the chairs would have 3 legs instead of 4. That's defective. And then the company takes that blueprint and they make millions of chairs with 3 legs. And then the trucking industry ships them all over the country. And the company goes out of business. Well, that's what happens in cancer. It goes into your cells and it makes a defective cell. And then you continue to manufacture these defective cells, and they're transported all over your body like metastasis, and you die. So what happens is antioxidants help by preventing that initial injury so that the electron is paired and the cell is not damaged. Another example is in aging, is that there's something at the end of cells called telomeres. And if they're short, you age very quickly. And so free radicals can shorten those chromosomes, and so people will have diseases like macular degeneration, or they'll have arthritis, or they'll have wrinkling, or they'll have gray hair, or they'll have senility. Now the good news is, if you have senility, don't worry, because by the time it hits you, you won't know it hit you. But basically, that's how antioxidants work. Now, how do we measure those? Well, we're hearing all about these different scores that we basically call ORAC scores, which are ways to assess the value of a particular product. And so we know there are 6 reactive oxygen species, 4 of which we can measure. And so the ORAC score is very high in this product, and also the S-ORAC, and also the H-ORAC, and also the N-ORAC scores. It's a balanced product. You're going to hear other products that will just start talking about the ORAC, and they have these incredibly large numbers, but what you have to understand is there's a limit to how much is helpful. So the most that eating fruits can help you is about 10 to 15%. That means about 3,000 to 5,000 ORAC score. Above that, it's not additional benefit. What we really are trying to create in this product is balance, a balance of those scores. Now the second factor is once you have the injury, then the body continues to heal itself. And this is called inflammation. It's a positive thing, except when you hear the symptoms that are occurring with inflammation. That's pain, redness, swelling, fever, scarring, cell replication, white blood cells. And when it happens chronically, that develops chronic debilitating diseases. And so fruits contain substances that have anti-inflammatory qualities. So we have antioxidants that help prevent the initial injury, and then we have anti-inflammatory substances that prevent the excessive progression of it. And we can measure these things by cell tests that have long, confusing names. Now, a lot of times when I speak, I'll have people follow me and say, well, you don't need to remember all these names. I have to tell you an interesting story about a farmer in Alabama. And he went to his doc and he says, Doc, I just don't feel like doing my chores around the house anymore. What's wrong with me? And after he gets an examination, the doc comes back to him and he says, listen, Doc, I can take it. Tell me in plain English what I have. And the doctor says to him, okay, in plain English, you're just plain lazy. And so the farmer says, okay, Doc, now put that in medical terms so I can tell my wife. So, the next thing we have to look at is, okay, it does these things, but what in these fruits actually does that? What produces these changes in inflammation and in these free radicals? What is contained in the fruits? Well, there's this couple that live really down the street from us, and they went fishing, the husband and wife. Now, the husband liked to fish, the wife just went along to get some suntan. Well, the husband's sleeping in the cabin, and she takes the boat out in the middle of the lake, and she's getting a suntan, and all of a sudden, the fish warden comes over and says, Miss, I'm going to have to arrest you. It says no fishing. And she says, I'm just lying here getting a suntan. I'm not fishing. He says, well, you've got all the equipment. And she says, if you take me in, I'm going to have to charge you with rape. He says, rape? I didn't touch you. She says, well, you've got all the right equipment. But the point is, there are certain things that are contained in the fruit called phytonutrients. And this is very important to understand, that these phytonutrients, they have categorized and recognized over 25,000 phytonutrients that are in fruits. The key ones that we're concerned with are the ones that produce pigment. And there's 7 different pigments, and they're called polyphenols, and there's over 4,000 of these. Some of them I've already mentioned. They fall into the category of what we call carotenoids. So when I mentioned pay close attention to these things you can make claims for, those were things like lutein, xanthine, and lycopene. They are called carotenoids. Then there's others that are in the main acai berry called anthocyanins. And these are basically 140 different types, and the most active is contained in the acai berry. So what do these do for the plant? Why would the plant produce them? Because what it does, it protects the plant itself. It protects the plant from viruses, bacteria, molds, fungi, and parasites. It protects the plant from predators like birds and insects and mammals. It protects the plant during droughts, during floods, during radiation and high heat. It protects the plant from competition and crowding, from toxins, pollutions, mutations, and free radicals. And then that's passed on to us. So the darker the pigment, the more of these phytonutrients, the more it passes on health benefits to us as humans as we consume them. And the best plants that you can get, the greatest concentration of these phytonutrients, are ones that are grown in the wild. Wild is better than organic or chemically grown. That is what you want to get. Almost 40% higher in terms of the nutrients if it's grown wild. Now, the second group of nutrients that I think you should be familiar with, that's very interesting, is a group called glyconutrients. You see, many people get all upset about sugar. They just read that word sugar and they get all upset, not realizing this concept of what's called a glyconutrient. The American Dietetic Association says that sugar is misrepresented as the cause of chronic disease. It is not the leading risk factor for diabetes or for heart disease. In fact, these bioactive polysaccharides, which go under the names of glycans and glycosides, are extremely important to your health and well-being. For example, you've all heard that there's a product in the MonaVie called glucosamine. It comes from a glycoside called glucosaminoglycans. It is the carbohydrate fraction that gives it its credibility in terms of its action. You'll also know that if you look up anthocyanins, the anthocyanidins, basically when you add a glucose unit and it becomes a glycoside, it becomes active and beneficial to your health. So the most active form of an anthocyanin is called cyanidin 3-glycoside. Some of you are familiar with wolfberry. The major phytonutrient in wolfberry is a type of polysaccharide that's called Lycium barium polysaccharide. Some of you have heard terms called xanthones. There's 400 different xanthones that are glycosides. Also, aloe vera's benefit is due to a carbohydrate called a glucosamine or ace-mannan. So glycosides are very important for your health. What they do is they prevent bacteria and viruses from adhering to receptors because they inhibit receptors. They also are the major communication highway because they surround cells so that cells can communicate properly and tell the cell it's old and it should die appropriately, or tell the cell to respond to a neurochemical like serotonin so you're not depressed. So glycosides are very important, and they're the key ingredients along with phytonutrients in fruits. Now here is a very interesting thing I want you to ponder. I mentioned earlier that the FDA, the USDA, the National Institute of Health, and the Institute of Medicine say that they have concluded that vitamins do not prove to be beneficial to prevent disease as it stands. Yet, in the United States, 75% of people in the U.S. take vitamins. And it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now, the federal government, the FDA, the USDA, the Institute of Health, Institute of Medicine tell us that fruits are very valuable for us. They want us to have at least 3 to 5 a day. There's hundreds of thousands of articles that support this, and yet, in the U.S., less than 18% of the population has 2 or more fruits a day. Now, what's wrong with this picture? And the reason I'm going to give you in a story what's wrong with this picture. In Alabama, people tend to get stopped for speeding. And this gentleman was speeding, and the officer pulled him over, and he may have been doing more than just speeding. So the officer says, I'm going to have to give you a breathalyzer test. And the southern gentleman says, sir, you cannot do that. He says, why not? He says, because I have asthma, and if I breathe into that thing, I'll have an asthmatic attack. So the officer says, no problem. What we're going to do is take you into the station, and we're going to draw some blood. The guy says, I can't do that. He says, why not? Well, you see, I'm a hemophiliac. If you draw blood, I'll bleed to death. He says, no problem. We'll have you take a urine sample. You just want to urinate into this cup. He says, I can't do that. I have diabetes. If I urinate, I'll dehydrate, and I'll have a low blood sugar. He says, no problem. Step out of the car, sir, and I want you to walk this line. He says, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. He says, why not? He says, because I'm drunk. Now, that seems like a silly story, but the reason why that we don't have the fruits like we do the vitamins is because basically, deep down, people are superficial. What they want are things that are convenient, taste good, are marketed, and basically don't cost a whole lot. That's what we're looking for. So really, a whole lot of this chemistry went into making this product taste good. Now, I don't know if some of you have been over to where these fruits are grown, these exotic fruits. But believe it or not, they taste terrible. They go under descriptions like tart or sour or bitter. Does not sound like the way MonaVie tastes. And also, when you take a fruit and you're shipping it many miles, you condense it, so you have to remove the water. Guess what you remove when you remove the water? You remove the flavor. So now you've got to make this product taste good, so you include natural flavors. So it's very difficult to kind of make this product, which basically is prone to be just awful tasting, to taste good, and that's important. Another thing is cost. One thing you don't want to look for bargains in is parachutes, or heart transplants, or life preservers, or health care products. You don't want to do that. And everybody says, oh my gosh, I don't want to spend money for this. I have never. My father-in-law is a funeral director. In all these years that I've been married to my wife, I've never seen a U-Haul with everybody's stuff following the hearse. You can't take it with you. Your health is your most important thing in life. And in fact, this product, believe it or not, is cheaper than a serving of water. If you go to where my daughter is a cheerleader at Auburn, and you're watching that game at 3 hours in that hot sun, and you want water, it will cost you $4.50 for water at the Auburn game. So money really isn't the issue. And it's marketing and getting people out there and telling other people. Because we're kind of hearing a society that says fruits are good, but they're not really making people do it. And we're making people consume fruits, and you ought to feel good about that. Go ahead, give yourself a hand. Now, I'm just going to add one more thing, just sort of, kind of, it's an interesting thing, and some people don't get this. But what happens is that the Center for Science and the Public Interest, they found out that fruits are contaminated to such a degree that they are a greater cause of foodborne illness in the U.S. than chicken and eggs. And the reason is primarily for organic fruits that are grown in South America. And that manure has E. coli, salmonella, and others, and therefore it increases the potential for contamination. But don't worry, because what they do is they take and they heat it for long periods of time at high heats, which kills the organisms, but it also kills the beneficial nutrients, which I've just told you about. So what we do at MonaVie is we flash pasteurize it. Now you say, that's heat. When you heat it high for a short period of time, it preserves the taste and the color and the phytonutrients and the glyconutrients. It preserves the beneficial nutrients, and I underline beneficial, because some of you might be confused because it destroys the enzymes. If you have any problem with the enzymes, understand that as soon as a product is picked, the enzymes begin the decay process. They start to break down those valuable phytonutrients. If you have a body that dies, it decays because of the enzymes. And also, it turns out that, thank goodness, when we eat the food, the enzymes won't destroy us because our digestive tract digests them before they can get absorbed. So when people think about enzymes, it's like my patient that came in. I said, you need to stop eating red meat. So he stopped putting ketchup on hamburgers. It's just not a big deal, the enzyme part of it. Now, what also happens, you might have an Uncle Fester who basically is not all there, and he might take a swig directly from the bottle. Or he might leave that bottle of MonaVie on the counter with the cap off. Or he might not put the cap on tightly and put it in the refrigerator. And the fruit becomes a great medium for bacteria to grow, and foodborne illness affected 100,000 people in the U.S. last year. So what MonaVie does is it puts sodium benzoate in the product. And before you go into a twit, because that sounds like a chemical, understand two things. It is less than 1/10 of 1%, which is way below the maximum allowed by law. More importantly, that foods that you eat naturally contain sodium benzoate. So herbs and spices and wine and caffeine and coffee and fruits and vegetables all contain naturally sodium benzoate, and organically grown cranberries and prunes have higher amounts in them naturally than allowed by law. So it's just not a big problem. Now, I've only got a few minutes left, and I want to just share two things. One is Dallin and others will tell you that we don't want people making absurd claims for this product. And sometimes people get carried away, and I have to tell you a story about my grandparents who were just extremely negative with each other. They were married 64 years, and they hated each other 63 of those 64 years. I mean, they were just at each other's throats all the time, and my grandmother died first. And so we're at the funeral, and the pallbearers are taking out the body, and as they're going out, one of the pallbearers bumped into the wall, and the coffin started shaking. And they let it down, and lo and behold, my grandmother was still alive. And she lived another 2 years and died again before my grandfather. So we go back to the funeral, and they're taking her out of the church, and my grandfather yells, "Watch the wall!" So neither my grandmother nor MonaVie is going to raise the dead. It just doesn't do all those wonderful things that sometimes we wish it would do. I do want to say that in the spirit of the company, a lot of the research that I do basically is in the field of psychology. And what we really want all out of life is happiness. And there's research that's been done that, believe it or not, and I don't have time to expound on this, that money, that appearance and attractiveness, and even health, and where you live, and your gender, and your race, that doesn't cause happiness. What they discovered, and this is what this company has, and you as parts of this company have, is the things that create happiness are things like relationships, connection with other people. Other things that it does is hope, having an opportunity to live a better life, to be healthier. The hope is what it is. And the other thing, and I like this story, it says, if you want to be happy for an hour, take a nap. If you want to be happy for a day, go fishing. If you want to be happy for a month, get married. If you want to be happy for a year, get an inheritance. But if you want to be happy for a lifetime, help someone else. And that's really what we'd like to be about. It's helping other people, altruism. And in the research of happiness, there is nothing that creates happiness more than that. So I want to end with saying, I want to use a quote from a famous philosopher. I hope some of you know him. His name's Wayne Newton. And Wayne Newton has taught me that you give me your money, and all you've done is give me your money. But give me your time, and you give me a part of your life. Thank you for spending the last half hour with me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I knew you guys would enjoy him. He's good. He's great.